Hello, virtual students. Today we'll be learning about sectionalism in the United States. Sectionalism describes the phenomenon that multiple sections of the United States were culturally different from each other and were more loyal to their section than the nation. Sectionalism before the Civil War involved two major factions, the North free states and the Southern slave states. To understand sectionalism, you have to understand the different sections. In the North, you had a much more industrialized economy. This included factories, a much higher number of immigrants to work in those factories, railroads, and a lot of capital. In the South, you had an agriculturally based economy, and where most of the money was flowing through cash crops, the number one and most widely planted crop being cotton. The differences between the two were not just culturally and economically, however, but also politically. In Congress, each faction was worried that the other faction would get more representation in Congress than their faction. So the northern free states were worried that the southern states were going to get more states as these western territory became states and would get more power in Congress, and the other side was worried as such. This came to a boiling point in Congress in 1820 during the Missouri Compromise. In the Missouri Compromise, the free states were worried that the admission of a slave state, Missouri, would tip the balance of power. So thus, the delegates met and decided that they would draw a line called the Missouri Compromise line that went like this, along the border of the free states and the slave states, and they decided they would admit Missouri as a slave state, and this line went across Louisiana Territory like this, to decide which states emerging from these territories would be free and which would be slave. As a result, like I said before, Missouri emerged as a slave state, and Maine emerged as a free state. This compromise worked pretty well until 1850, when California was going to be admitted as a state. California didn't have a state to be paired with, so a lot of fighting broke out, and eventually delegates in Congress settled on the Compromise of 1850, otherwise known as the Great Compromise. In the Great Compromise, California was admitted as a free state. The idea called popular sovereignty was decided to rule over the remaining territories, mostly in the Utah and New Mexico territory, about what would happen when they became states. But also Kansas, which is about here. It was decided that when these territories became states and applied for statehood, they would be allowed to vote on whether they were going to be a free or a slave state, thus the idea of popular sovereignty. Another key idea of the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act, which stated that escaped slaves from the southern region to any part of the country that was a free state, those slaves had to be returned to their owner under federal law. This further agitated relations between the southern and northern parts of the country, largely due to the activities of the Underground Railroad, and the North being a safe haven for escaped slaves. Finally, the slave trade was banned in Washington, D.C. This was a symbolic victory for the free states. This is a short presentation on sectionalism, and these events, acts, and so on and so forth describe the events that led up to the Civil War. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.